My name is Malene Parker, and the moment I realized my family didn't see me as one of their own was the day I received that text message from my mother. I was sitting in my office, surrounded by floor-to-ceiling glass panels that overlooked the Boston Harbor, watching my company's luxury yachts sway in the calm current when the phone buzzed. I expected one of the usual messages, maybe a forwarded article about how women should lean in, or a passive-aggressive comment about how someone else's daughter had made partner at a law firm. Instead, it was a single line that sliced deeper than any critique ever had. This year's cruise is for successful family members only. It took me a few seconds to process it. At first, I thought it was a mistake. Surely she didn't mean it that way, but rereading it 3 times didn't change its meaning. I wasn't invited. Not because there wasn't space or because of scheduling conflicts, but because in their eyes I wasn't successful enough to be seen. Not on their yacht, not in their stories, not as one of them. I stared at the message, the corners of my mouth twitching, not in amusement but in disbelief. They didn't know. They had no idea. The very yacht they had chartered to celebrate this twisted vision of success was mine. I owned it. Every inch, every thread in the custom upholstery, every drop of fuel that powered its polished engines. But I never told them. Because for years I wanted them to love me for who I was, not for what I had. And in that moment, the ache in my chest wasn't pride or power, it was the sting of knowing they never even tried. I grew up in Brookline, one of Boston's wealthiest neighborhoods, in a home that looked like it belonged on the cover of a lifestyle magazine but felt colder than the stone it was made from. Our family dinners were more like boardroom meetings. My father, Richard Parker, was a legend in the world of investment banking. His success was measured in decimal points and silence. My mother, Eleanor, was the queen of perfection. She knew everyone, judged everything, and made sure our family name was a currency in the social elite. My brother James was the chosen one. Harvard MBA, private equity prodigy, future heir to the Parker legacy. My sister Allison perfected the other acceptable role. Beautiful, poised, married to a hotel empire heir, always on brand. Me, I was the glitch. I did everything right on paper. Prep school, Ivy League, internships at the top firms. But every step made me feel less like myself. The nights I cried in the office bathroom stalls, the weekends I spent paralyzed by dread, it wasn't a phase. It was my soul screaming. And 7 years ago, I quit. I walked away from finance, from my family's expectations, and took a job at a marina. My parents thought it was a phase, a rebellion. They didn't understand that it was a rebirth. I studied. I worked 18-hour days. I scrubbed decks, loaded gear, listened to clients, learned what made them feel luxury. I built my business from the water up. 1 boat became 2. 2 became 5. Today, I run Maritime Luxury, a fleet of premium yachts catering to the wealthiest clientele on the eastern seaboard. My clients include senators, celebrities, and Fortune 100 CEOs. And the crown jewel of our fleet, the Azure Dream, is the yacht my parents unknowingly chartered for this success-only cruise. The irony, would be laughable if it weren't so tragic. They never asked what I built. They only ever asked when I'd come back to real work. And this text, this deliberate exclusion, confirmed everything I always feared. In their eyes, I'd never be enough. I remember walking down to the dock that day, the breeze against my cheek, the scent of sea salt mixing with gasoline and varnish, and thinking how peaceful it felt to be among things I built with my own hands. Not gifts, not legacies, just grit, failure, learning, and quiet triumphs. That night, as I sat with my operations director reviewing schedules, I made a decision. I wasn't going to fight. I wasn't going to yell. I would show up as myself, as the woman they dismissed, as the owner of their fantasy. And I'd let them sit in it, not to humiliate them, not to boast, but to finally, fully reclaim my story. I wasn't the rebel. I wasn't the black sheep. I was the storm they never saw coming, and they were already on my ship. The day of the cruise dawned with skies so clear they looked painted, the kind of weather that made postcards feel like reality. As I stood at the dock, watching the guests arrive one by one in designer sunglasses and vacation smiles, I felt none of the anxiety I used to associate with family gatherings. Instead, there was a stillness inside me, like the calm before the tide shifts. I wore white linen, hair pulled into a low knot, no jewelry save for the thin silver cuff I always wore on my left wrist engraved inside with a phrase only I knew. Build quietly. They'll hear you. I blended in easily with the crew. That was the point. I wasn't on the manifest as a guest, nor was I on the list my parents had prepared, because they didn't know I'd be there. They thought they were meeting the yacht's captain for a briefing before departure. That captain was me. I had instructed my staff not to refer to me by name unless asked, and not to correct my parents unless absolutely necessary. I wanted to see how they behaved when they thought no one was watching. When the limousine pulled up and the Parker family spilled out in shades of tan and entitlement, my heart didn't race. I didn't flinch. I simply observed. My mother stepped out first, lips painted coral, heels too high for a dock, adjusting her silk scarf like she was walking a Paris runway instead of boarding a boat. My father followed, sunglasses hiding the constant calculation in his eyes, checking his watch before even acknowledging anyone around him. Then came James, wearing that smug smile he perfected at Harvard, arm linked with his new fiancée, a petite blonde influencer type who seemed more interested in capturing content than meeting the family she was about to marry into. Finally, Allison, with her husband trailing behind her and their toddler already whining about the heat. They were exactly as I remembered them, frozen in the same hierarchy, still living in a world where image mattered more than connection. My mother greeted the stewardess at the gangway like she was ordering coffee. Please inform the captain that Richard and Eleanor Parker have arrived. I watched the stewardess hesitate just slightly before replying, Of course, ma'am. She's expecting you. She. My mother blinked. She? The stewardess smiled politely. Yes, Captain Parker. My father's eyebrows drew together. That's an unusual name for a captain. I stepped forward then, walking slowly, deliberately, letting the sun hit me as I approached. My mother saw me first. Her expression flickered. Surprise, then confusion, then a practiced smile that didn't reach her eyes. Malene, what are you doing here? I nodded. Welcome aboard to the Azure Dream. I'm your captain. For a moment, no one spoke. James chuckled awkwardly. Come on, you're joking, right? I met his gaze, calm. No, I'm not. My father's voice was flat. This is your yacht? All of them are, I replied. Maritime Luxury is my company. The silence was thick. My mother's mouth opened and closed twice. But I thought you work on boats. I do. I also own them. I built this fleet from the ground up over the last 7 years. You just happened to charter my flagship." I let that sink in. I didn't need to explain more. Let them fill in the blanks with all the things they didn't know because they never asked. My father was the first to recover. He straightened his posture, extended a hand like we were strangers meeting at a networking event. "Well, congratulations. This is impressive." I didn't take his hand. "Thank you." I turned toward the crew. "Let's prepare to depart." The next few hours unfolded like a play with too many rewrites. My family walked the yacht as if they had discovered some hidden gem, pointing out features, praising the craftsmanship, asking the crew where it was made, who designed it, how much it cost. They avoided direct questions about me, about how I'd built any of this. Instead, they spoke in generalities like if they didn't acknowledge it too closely, they wouldn't have to reconcile their image of me with the woman who had quietly surpassed all their expectations. During dinner, they gathered on the upper deck beneath fairy lights and laughed as if the years of dismissal hadn't existed. I watched from the bridge, my hands on the polished wheel, not out of bitterness, but out of clarity. They weren't cruel. They were conditioned. Conditioned to believe success only looked one way. That value came with titles and lineage and the approval of people who looked and thought like them. I had chosen another path, one with bruised hands, long nights, salt in my hair, and clients who respected my mind. And I wouldn't trade it, not even for a seat at their table. That night, after the guests had retired to their luxury cabins and the crew rotated shifts, I stood alone at the bow of the yacht, the Atlantic stretching wide before me, stars scattered like secrets overhead. I felt no triumph, just release. They could spend the weekend pretending this was a coincidence, pretending I hadn't shattered every limitation they placed on me, but I knew. And now, so did they. The next morning, sunlight spilled across the deck in long golden ribbons, dancing on the teak wood like it had a life of its own. The water was calm, almost unnaturally so, and the air smelled of promise salt, citrus, and something new. I woke before the crew, a habit forged in the early days when I had to do everything myself. From fueling to scrubbing to bookkeeping, there was a time I had no team, only vision and stubbornness. As I moved through the quiet corridors of the yacht, memories surfaced like echoes. I passed the galley and recalled sleeping beside the industrial oven during a storm, too exhausted to climb to the crew bunk. I passed the salon and remembered sketching the initial floor plans for the yacht's interior on a coffee-stained napkin, trying to figure out how to combine elegance with function. And now, here I was, captain and owner, with my family unknowingly sailing on the proof that I was never just their disappointment. By the time breakfast was served, the guests were awake and gathered under the shaded veranda. Fresh fruit, croissants, and smoked salmon were laid out on trays while espresso machines hissed softly in the background. I approached as James was in the middle of recounting a deal he'd closed in Dubai. My mother laughed in that practiced way of hers, one hand resting on her fiance's shoulder, playing the proud matriarch. My father sat back, sipping black coffee, his expression unreadable. I walked over and poured myself a cup of tea from the silver pot, silence falling over the table like fog. Allison was the first to speak. "So, you really own all this?" Her tone wasn't cruel, just confused. I nodded. "Every inch." My father studied me for a long moment, then said, "Why didn't you tell us?" The question landed like a stone. I stirred my tea slowly, then looked up. "Because you never asked." The words hung there, heavier than truth, No one responded. I didn't need them to. My mother finally cleared her throat and asked, "What made you want to do this?" Her voice was gentler now, thinner. "I didn't want to spend my life proving myself in rooms where no one wanted me to succeed," I replied. "I wanted to build something where I belonged, even if I had to build it alone." James shifted uncomfortably in his chair. "Well, you definitely succeeded." He forced a laugh. "I mean, it's insane. The crew, the finishes, this yacht's nicer than half the ones I've seen in Monte Carlo." "I'm glad you like it," I said simply. My father set his cup down with a soft clink. "You're still our daughter, you know." I looked at him, really looked. For the first time in a long while, I saw not the man who wielded silence as punishment, but someone older, more uncertain, perhaps realizing his certainty had cost him more than he'd anticipated. "I was always your daughter," I said. "You just never saw her." Eleanor looked away then, pretending to admire the horizon, but her knuckles were white around the stem of her mimosa glass. For the remainder of the meal, they tried to steer the conversation toward safer topics. My brother mentioned market trends. My sister asked about spa options. My mother complimented the fresh flowers. I let them retreat. I wasn't there to win their praise. I had already won something better: freedom. Later that day, I gave the crew some time off and took the wheel myself. There was something meditative about steering through open waters, the engine's low hum beneath me like a heartbeat. As we sailed toward the next private cove, I glanced up and saw my niece Allison's daughter watching me from the top of the stairs. She was maybe 5, barefoot, hair tangled by sea breeze, holding a crayon in one hand. "Are you driving the boat?" she asked. I smiled. "I am. Can I do that too one day?" Her eyes were wide, not with disbelief, but with possibility. I knelt to her level. "You can do anything, especially if they say you can't." She grinned, then darted back to her mother, leaving me with a lump in my throat. Maybe they wouldn't see me, but she did, and that mattered more. That night, the sea was ink black, and the stars spilled like powdered sugar across the sky. I stood alone on the upper deck, barefoot on the teak, arms resting on the railing, staring out into the endless dark. Inside, laughter echoed from the dining room where my family toasted to a trip they hadn't earned and memories they hadn't built. I let them enjoy it. It wasn't about punishing them anymore. This journey had never really been about them. It had always been about reclaiming myself. The weight of years of wanting to be chosen, praised, understood had been slipping off me one knot at a time since the moment they stepped on board. Now, under the hush of the ocean sky, I felt the last of it drift into the waves. The next morning, I woke early and took the tender out alone, skimming the water like a stone through silk. I dropped anchor near a deserted islet, climbed onto the sand with a thermos of tea, and sat cross-legged on the warm rock. My mind wandered back to the cold winters in Milwaukee. The sound of my sister's name always said with pride, while mine was spoken only when necessary. I remembered staying late in the library, pretending I liked the quiet, when really I was just hoping that somewhere, someday, it would all matter. And it did. Not because they saw it, because I made it real. I spent hours out there until my skin turned golden and my heart felt weightless. When I returned, the deckhand handed me a note. It was from my mother. "Would love a private word when you have a moment, Eleanor." I considered ignoring it, but something in me, a stubborn curiosity, or perhaps a final need for closure, said yes. I found her in the smaller salon where the afternoon light fell soft and forgiving across her carefully curled hair. She looked older in that moment, not just from time but from years of holding on too tightly to control. "You're not angry," she said, more a statement than a question. I didn't answer. "I thought you'd be furious, the way we handled things, how we treated you." Her voice trembled, and it startled me. Not because I hadn't seen her cry before, but because I realized I didn't need her tears anymore. I said quietly, "but that's not what this trip is for." She sighed, the sound brittle. "We didn't understand you, Sophia. You always wanted something we didn't know how to give. You weren't easy to raise." I smiled sadly. "No, I wasn't easy to ignore." She blinked. I could see her weighing whether to defend herself or just let it sit. For once, she let it sit. "Your father's proud, you know," she added. "He just doesn't know how to say it." "That's all right," I replied. "I didn't build this to impress him. I built it so I wouldn't need to." She looked away, and for the first time I thought maybe she was starting to understand, not agree, not rewrite history, but at least see me without the filters of resentment or comparison. I stood to leave, and before I did, I said something I hadn't planned to. "I forgive you, not because you've earned it, but because I'm done carrying it." Her eyes filled, but I didn't wait for a response. I had already set myself free. That evening, James approached me with an odd expression, somewhere between discomfort and wonder. "I Googled your company," he said. "You're on the Forbes Under 40 list." I nodded. "For 2 years now." He whistled low. "Why didn't you ever say anything?" I shrugged. "Because people who care will know, and those who don't won't listen anyway." He didn't argue. Instead, he offered something I didn't expect. "You're doing all right, Sophia. More than all right." I thanked him, knowing it was as close to an apology as I'd get. The final days of the cruise passed with unexpected lightness. We swam in turquoise coves, drank wine under the stars, and shared meals that didn't feel forced. There was still distance between us, but now it was a choice, not a wound. On our last night aboard, the chef prepared a 7-course dinner, and the crew lit lanterns across the deck. My father stood with a glass of scotch and looked around, then back at me. "This is a hell of a boat," he said. "Yacht," I corrected gently. He nodded. "Right, yacht. It suits you." And that, somehow, meant more than all his silence. As the yacht returned to port the next day, I stood at the bow while the mainland slowly came into view. My family packed up, thanked the crew, and left with hugs that were softer, more tentative. They didn't ask for another trip. They knew better. I stayed behind, watching the dock empty. Then I walked to the bridge, took the wheel, and turned us back out to sea. The wind carried a soft salt scent as the yacht slid back into open water, and for the first time in years, Sophia felt entirely unburdened. There was no timeline pressing against her chest, no voice in her head asking what came next for the sake of someone else's approval. The world stretched wide, the ocean her only audience, and she could breathe. Her crew worked quietly, efficiently, giving her space not out of obligation but out of respect that had been earned, not inherited. She wandered down to her quarters, removed the necklace her mother had given her when she turned 16, a delicate silver chain with an initial charm, once precious, now merely symbolic of a version of her that had long been shed, and placed it in a drawer she no longer opened. She wasn't that girl anymore. She was the architect of her own life. That night, Anchored far from the chaos of the mainland, Sophia lay on the upper deck with nothing but a light blanket and the stars. The water whispered beside her like a lullaby, and her chest rose and fell without effort. She thought about the young version of herself sitting in the campus library with ink-stained hands and empty pockets, trying to design freedom on a screen cracked from dropping her only laptop. That girl wouldn't believe where she ended up, but she would be proud. In the weeks that followed, Sophia's story quietly traveled through circles her parents once ruled, not through tabloids or interviews, but whispers at charity galas and murmured conversations during brunches in Beverly Hills. "Did you hear about Richard and Eleanor Porter's daughter?" they'd ask. "Apparently, she's the one who owns the Amara." Yes, that Amara. The floating palace. Her parents never confirmed the details. Pride and shame existed too close together. Meanwhile, Sophia focused on building something more lasting than resentment. She expanded her brand, offering scholarships to students like her, creative, financially shackled, unseen by traditional systems. She hired interns from shelters and funded programs for women escaping controlling households. The Yacht, once her fortress, became a vessel for transformation, hosting creative retreats and quiet escapes for those who needed room to imagine new beginnings. Her friend Jessica joined her team full-time, now Director of Wellness and Support Services. Tyler became head of cybersecurity, ensuring that no one, not even someone's own blood, could use digital tools to trap them in fear. Sophia didn't broadcast her victories. She lived them. And, quietly, consistently, she became someone young women pointed to when asked what resilience looked like. A year after that fateful birthday, Sophia stood once more at the edge of her deck, dressed not for battle, but for celebration. Her team had planned a small gathering to mark the launch of their foundation. There was no press, no stage, just music, honest laughter, and champagne served under lanterns. Jessica raised a glass and said, "To Sophia, for proving that starting over doesn't mean starting from nothing." The group clinked glasses. Sophia smiled, not the tight, polite smile her parents had trained into her, but one full of fire and peace. "To all of us," she added, lifting her glass, "and to every girl still being told her dreams are too expensive, her voice too loud, or her worth too small, you're not too much. They are simply not enough." That night, as the music drifted over the waves and stories were shared under the stars, Sophia realized something profound. Her past had not broken her. It had forged her. And she would spend the rest of her days helping others step out of silence and into the light. Not because she needed revenge, but because she now knew her purpose. And that, finally, was more than enough.